Imagine this. You decide to move close to your children because, well, who better than them to take care of you when you need it most? At first, everything goes well. You feel supported, protected. But over time, things start to get complicated. Suddenly, you're not sure if you're a burden or if they're the ones depending on you too much. What you thought would be the solution to your problems starts to feel more like a trap. Sound familiar? Don't worry, you're not alone. Today, we're going to talk about an uncomfortable truth no one wants to say out loud. Living close to your children in old age isn't always the magical solution it's made out to be. In fact, more often than not, it raises more questions than answers. But here's the good part. We're not just going to talk about the problem, we're going to go further and explore what Stoicism has to say on the matter. And I promise, some of the insights you'll hear today might completely change the way you see things. My name is Gabriel, and if this is your first time here, I invite you to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Stay with me until the end, because we're going to unravel these uncomfortable truths, and most importantly, I'll show you how to face these challenges without losing your peace or independence. Let's get started. Number 1. The myth of proximity as a cure for loneliness. When we think about loneliness in old age, it's easy to assume the solution is simple. Just live close to your children. How could I feel lonely if my family is right nearby? We tell ourselves, and on some level, it makes sense. But here's the first uncomfortable truth. Loneliness doesn't always go away with physical closeness. In fact, you might live just a street away from your kids and still feel as though you're on a different continent. Why does this happen? Well, loneliness isn't so much about physical distance as it is about emotional connection. You can be surrounded by people, even your dearest loved ones, and still feel isolated if there isn't a true connection. The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus, for example, said, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but the opinions we have about them." In other words, it's not your children's presence or absence that defines your loneliness. It's how you experience and process that relationship. This is where Stoicism offers a revolutionary perspective. True companionship lies within yourself. This might sound strange at first, but it makes perfect sense when you think it through. The Stoics teach us not to rely on others for our mental peace. The loneliness we feel doesn't magically disappear when we're close to someone else. It's an inner work. If you're looking for something in others that should be coming from within, you're likely to end up feeling disappointed, or worse, emotionally dependent on them. And that's when physical closeness starts to feel like a trap, because instead of solving the problem, it only makes you more aware of what's missing emotionally. So, what can we do? Start by building a stronger relationship with ourselves. Marcus Aurelius often wrote that the mind adapts and turns any obstacle into its own purpose. Instead of seeing loneliness as an enemy, we can use it as an opportunity to know ourselves better, to become our own company. Have you noticed how sometimes we can enjoy our own solitude? Think of those quiet afternoons when you're alone but at peace. That's what Stoicism aims for, to help you find that peace within yourself, regardless of who's nearby or far away. Then, being close to your children becomes a complement, not a necessity. So before you think that moving closer to your kids is the solution to loneliness, ask yourself, am I looking for an emotional connection or just a physical presence? Because if it's the latter, proximity won't be the cure you expect. The key is to first work on that connection within yourself. This is just the beginning, but believe me, it's a crucial step. Number 2, emotional independence in old age is a Stoic priority. Most of us grow up with the idea that as we age, we become more dependent on those around us, especially our children. And yes, there are things that do require more support with age, like mobility or certain daily tasks. But here's another uncomfortable truth. Emotional dependence is a much more dangerous trap than physical dependence, because unlike needing help to move a heavy piece of furniture, depending emotionally on someone can rob you of peace, autonomy, and that sense of control we all need to feel well. The Stoics, especially Epictetus, taught us that true freedom comes from having control over our emotions, not over external circumstances. There is only one path to happiness, he said, and it's to stop worrying about things outside our control. If we rely on the constant attention, approval, or affection of others to be okay, what happens when we don't get that? We feel let down, frustrated, or even resentful. And this is a real risk when we live close to our children. You might think, well, it's natural to feel hurt if my kids don't pay me the attention I expect. And yes, it is. But Stoicism invites us to reframe this concern. Ask yourself, why should my emotional well-being depend on what my children do or don't do? They, like any human being, have their own commitments, struggles, and often their own internal conflicts. Sometimes they're available for you and sometimes they're not. And that's okay. The key is not to let that affect your inner peace. And how do we do that? By developing what the Stoics called selective indifference. It doesn't mean you don't care about your relationship with your children. Of course you do. But it does mean not letting their attention or lack of it determine how you feel inside. True emotional independence lies in finding peace that doesn't waver based on external factors. Imagine your emotions are like a ship. Instead of letting every wave toss it about, your children's actions or inactions, what we aim for is a solid anchor within ourselves. When you have that internal stability, the emotional ups and downs become less turbulent. Physical closeness with your children stops being a source of worry or expectation and becomes simply what it is, a circumstance, not the center of your well-being. That doesn't mean it's easy. Throughout our lives, we've learned to depend on others to feel loved, valued, or recognized. But as Seneca said, the most powerful person is the one who has self-mastery. And at this stage of life, what better gift could you give yourself than that emotional freedom? So next time you feel uneasy because your children haven't called or aren't spending enough time with you, remember, your happiness isn't in their hands, it's in yours. Work on your emotional independence, and you'll see how, little by little, having your children nearby becomes a blessing rather than a source of frustrated expectations. And like any Stoic lesson, it's not about perfection, but about practice. Number 3, the challenge of mutual expectations and how to avoid resentment. Now let's talk about another complex topic: expectations. How many times have you felt you expected more from your children or they from you, and when those expectations aren't met, resentment appears? It starts as a slight discomfort and, if left unchecked, can turn into an invisible wall between you. When you choose to live close to your children, both sides can easily fall into the trap of expectations. As a parent, you might expect them to be more present, to visit, to spend time with you. They, on the other hand, might expect you to be available to help, perhaps to watch the grandkids or support them in various ways. At first, it all seems manageable, but over time, unmet expectations can start to pile up. Seneca put it clearly: do not expect events to happen as you wish them to happen as they do, and your life will go smoothly. It's a reminder that expectations are often the root of our frustration. If you're constantly expecting others to act in certain ways, you're bound to be disappointed. Think about it. Living close to your children doesn't guarantee they'll always be available for you or that they'll fulfill what you consider family obligations. And vice versa, you may not always be available for them either. That's life. Everyone has their own rhythm, priorities, and issues. And when those expectations aren't met, You might start feeling forgotten, ignored, or worse, used. And they might start to feel like your demands are too much, that you're not giving them space, or that you expect too much. This is where resentment sneaks in. And once it does, it's hard to undo the damage. That's why Stoic wisdom is so valuable here. Marcus Aurelius said it well. Welcome whatever comes, because what happens is in the nature of things. If you accept that your children won't always be there as you expect, and they accept the same from you, there's no room for resentment to take root. The key lies in communication and in adjusting expectations, not only with them, but with yourself. What if, instead of expecting them to call every day, you choose to enjoy the moments when they do? And what if, instead of expecting them to always ask for help, you offer it only when you truly feel energetic and willing? This shift in focus eases the emotional burden on both sides. It's easier said than done, I know. After all, you've spent your life taking care of them, and it's natural to expect a little reciprocity. But remember Epictetus's teaching. If you want to be happy, stop wishing for what is not in your control. In other words, your expectations about how your children should behave are not under your control, but your reaction to their behavior is. One of the best ways to avoid resentment is to free yourself from the invisible chains that expectations create. Setting clear boundaries, for yourself as well as for them, is crucial. You don't have to be available at all times, and neither do they. When you allow each person to live their life without excessive pressure, you create a healthier, more balanced relationship. So before those small disappointments grow into toxic resentment, take a step back. Adjust your expectations. Remember, no one is perfect, not you, not them. And that's okay. In that acceptance, you'll find peace. Number 4, healthy detachment and how to love without clinging. Let's talk about something essential, yet hard to practice. Detachment. Because of course you love your children and they love you. But at some point, that love can turn into an attachment that instead of granting freedom, becomes suffocating. And yes, emotional attachment is tempting, especially when life nudges you toward the fragility of old age. The problem arises when that attachment turns into a need. How many times have we confused loving with clinging? Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, said something that hits right at the heart. Love, but remember that everything you love is ephemeral. I know it's not the warmest phrase, but it holds profound wisdom. He's not saying to stop loving others, he's saying to learn to love without depending on their constant presence, without clinging to them as if they were your only source of well-being. We often think that loving our children means always being there, that they should always feel within our orbit. But the truth is that sometimes love means giving them space, allowing them to grow, even if it means they're far away or don't spend as much time with you as you'd like. And it's not only about giving them space, but giving yourself space as well. Attachment creates excessive expectations, and when those expectations aren't met, what arises? Suffering. Detachment from a Stoic perspective doesn't mean indifference. It's not about stopping loving your children or becoming cold. It's about recognizing that they too have their own paths, their own lives, and that it's unfair for both of you if love becomes a chain that holds them back. Let's put it into a more visual example. Love should be like holding a butterfly in your hand. If you squeeze it too tightly, you'll hurt it. If you let it go, it flies free, but you'll always have the memory of its beauty in your hand. That's detachment, letting the butterfly of your relationships fly without fear of losing it. If it returns, it does so out of love, not obligation. This kind of love, detached love, is powerful. By not demanding anything in return, not constant presence or undue attention, you free yourself from anxiety and the fear of losing what you love. Because the reality is, if you depend on your children's closeness to feel good? What happens if they move away, if their jobs take them elsewhere, or if their lives simply absorb them? You're left with a void, a pain that doesn't come from physical distance, but from emotional attachment. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't spend time with your children or enjoy their company. Of course you should. But there's a big difference between enjoying something and depending on it. Stoicism teaches us that inner peace comes from learning to let go of what we can't control, and that includes the lives of others, even our dearest loved ones. So, how do we practice healthy detachment? First, by recognizing that love isn't measured by the amount of time we spend together, but by the quality of that time. Second, by accepting that life has its cycles and that your children, like you, are living theirs. And finally, by remembering that your emotional well-being depends on no one but yourself. Loving without clinging is a difficult lesson, but if you master it, I assure you that your relationship with your children will be much more balanced and, most importantly, much freer. Remember, detachment isn't the absence of love. In fact, it's the purest form of love. If you're enjoying this video so far and feel you're discovering new ways to apply Stoic wisdom to your life, handling the challenges of aging with greater serenity, I invite you to subscribe and hit the like button to support this content. Stay tuned until the end, because the most revealing insights are yet to come. And for those of you who are committed to finding balance and aging wisely, I have a final reflection that could completely change the way you approach this stage of life. And tell me, where are you listening from? I'd love to know. Let's keep going. Number 5, the balance between support and dependency. Now let's dive into one of the trickiest areas, balancing the support you give your children with not becoming dependent on them. This can be more complicated than it seems because the line between helping and becoming a burden, or feeling like one, is sometimes very thin. And often, we don't even realize when we've crossed that line. As parents, we have a natural urge to be there for our children no matter how old they are. It's almost instinctual. They ask for help, and of course, you want to give it. But as we age, the dynamics shift. You're no longer the pillar they leaned on when they were young. Now things are more complex, and if not managed carefully, you could end up in a position where, instead of being a source of support, you become someone they rely on too much. Or worse, you become the one who relies on them. Here, Stoicism reminds us of a simple but powerful truth: nothing in excess. This balance is essential not only for maintaining a healthy relationship, but also for preserving something crucial in old age: your dignity. Needing physical help is one thing, and that's completely valid. We all reach a point where it's inevitable, but it's very different to depend emotionally or psychologically on your children to feel well or complete. So how do we avoid crossing that line? How do we find the balance between being supportive without letting that support become an expectation, or worse, an obligation? Seneca gives us a key: self-sufficiency. The wise person is sufficient unto themselves, he said. Now, this doesn't mean isolating yourself emotionally, it means maintaining internal independence. Because what happens when, without realizing it, you start relying on your children's availability or care for your well-being? You enter dangerous territory, you become dependent, and in the end, they may feel overwhelmed. A common mistake is to think that support is a one-way street, where you always have to be available for them, or vice versa. But that's not the case. True support is a two-way street. It's giving when you can, but also knowing when to stop. And the same goes for them. For example, maybe they ask you to watch the grandkids while they work. Perfect. But what happens if it starts affecting you physically or emotionally? That's where balance comes in. You agree to help, but not at the expense of your own well-being. On the flip side, there may come a time when you're the one who needs help. There's nothing wrong with asking for it, but make sure it's just that. a request, not a demand. Your children shouldn't feel obligated to take care of you beyond what they can handle. It's an act of love to allow them to support you, but it's also an act of love not to make them feel like they're your only lifeline. To maintain this balance, clear and honest communication is key, without guilt or pressure. It's essential to be transparent about what you need and what you can offer, without expecting that they'll always be available for you or vice versa. And here's where detachment comes into play again. If you understand that neither you nor your children can be there all the time for one another, and that this doesn't mean there's any less love, you can create a much healthier relationship. Think of balance as a tightrope. Whenever you feel yourself leaning too far to one side, whether by giving too much or asking too much, you need to adjust your stance. The trick is not to let that adjustment become an extra burden for you or for them. Sometimes, simply asking yourself, am I asking for too much? Am I offering more than I can handle? Can be the best exercise in self-awareness. In short, independence isn't about doing everything alone, but about finding an inner peace that allows you to give and receive help without becoming dependent or overburdening others. So next time you find yourself in this position, ask yourself, am I offering support or am I creating dependency? And if you feel you're leaning too far in either direction, remember, balance is the key to preserving both your dignity and your peace. Number 6, accepting changes in family dynamics. Let's address a topic that many prefer to avoid, the inevitable transformation in family dynamics. Because whether we like it or not, with time, relationships change. You're no longer the central figure in your children's lives as you were when they depended on you for everything. Now, they have their own families, jobs, and concerns. And if you've decided to move closer to them, you may find that there isn't as much time for you as you expected. Accepting this isn't easy, I know. You've spent your life being the pillar of the family, the point of reference, and suddenly you find yourself in a position where, even though you're nearby, you're not necessarily the priority. This is one of those uncomfortable truths that, if not handled well, can lead to frustration or resentment. But here's where the Stoics offer us a powerful tool: the serene acceptance of what we cannot change. Marcus Aurelius said, "You are not acting in accordance with nature if you complain about what happens to you." Family dynamics, like everything in life, are fluid. They change and will continue to change. And if you resist these changes, if you cling to how things should be, you will only suffer. Perhaps your children once turned to you for every important decision, but now they're in a different stage. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's simply part of life's natural cycle. The problem is that we often interpret these changes as a sign that we're no longer important, when in reality what's happening is a natural adjustment of roles. You may no longer be at the center of every decision, but you are still an essential part of their lives. That role just expresses itself differently now, and resisting this reality only creates more tension and distance. Let's take a practical example. Suppose that in the past, your children would visit you every Sunday for a family meal. It was a tradition. But over time, they start missing those meals because of their own commitments: work, kids, time with their partners. Naturally, this may hurt at first. You might think, do they no longer care about spending time with me? But this is where Stoic philosophy can be an ally. Instead of seeing these absences as rejection, try to see them as a natural evolution. In the end, love isn't measured by the frequency of visits, but by the quality of the relationship in the moments you do share. Seneca said, "Nothing belongs to us, we are only passing through." The same is true for the roles we play within our families. If you cling to how things were before, you'll miss out on the opportunity to enjoy them as they are now. Maybe they're not there for every family meal, but when they are, those moments can be more meaningful if you accept them as they are, rather than comparing them to how they used to be. Accepting change doesn't mean you stop mattering or that you're being left out. It means you have the wisdom to understand that life moves forward, that people evolve, and that love isn't measured by constancy, but by the ability to adapt to new dynamics without losing the essential bond. Instead of lamenting what's no longer the same, you can take the opportunity to redefine what is possible in this new phase. Maybe they don't visit every Sunday, but what if you start proposing other ways to spend time together that suit their current realities? Adapting to changes is also an act of love. The Stoics teach us to stop fighting against the river of time. Family, like everything in life, is in constant flux. What today seems like distance could tomorrow be a new form of connection. The important thing is not to cling to how you think things should be, but to accept them as they are, and from that acceptance, act with wisdom and patience. Remember that, at the end of the day, family bonds don't depend on how often you see or speak to each other, but on the emotional strength you share. And if you can accept these changes with serenity, you'll be giving them an invaluable example of how to face the inevitable cycles of life. The final Stoic lesson: live for yourself, not just for others. We've reached the last and perhaps most important lesson. In this stage of life, it's crucial to remember that you still have a life of your own. Yes, your children, grandchildren, and friends are all important. But there's something that often gets overlooked when we spend too much time focused on others: ourselves. It's common, after a lifetime of raising, caring for, and looking out for others, to enter old age with the same mindset, to think that our role is still to be there for our children, to be the constant support, the family pillar. But there's something essential that Stoicism reminds us of. You're still a complete person with desires, interests, and a purpose that goes beyond serving others. Marcus Aurelius expressed it powerfully. Your duty is to act rightly, not to worry about what others may think of you. This is a key phrase, because often in this stage we get trapped in the idea that our worth depends on what we do for others. And while that might sound noble, it can be a dangerous trap. If you live only to meet others' expectations, where does that leave your own life? Think for a moment about all you've accomplished, all you've given. You've built a family, worked, made sacrifices for others, but now is the time to start doing something for yourself. And no, this isn't selfishness, it's self-care. It's recognizing that you're still here and that you have your own story to write. The Stoics often spoke about the importance of living in alignment with our own nature. And part of that nature is continuing to seek meaning, growth, and personal fulfillment no matter your age. Sometimes we fall into the trap of thinking that, as parents, our best days are behind us, that our only function now is to accompany others on their journey. But that's not what the great Stoic philosophers would have advised. They believed that each stage of life has its own richness, and that as long as we're here, there's something valuable to discover and create. Living close to your children doesn't mean living solely for them. You can be nearby, support them when necessary, but that doesn't have to be the center of your existence. So the big question is, what do you want to do with the time you have left? What dreams have you put on hold? What have you wanted to explore, but never had the chance to? This is the moment. Old age is not an end. It's a new stage with its own challenges, but also its own freedoms. The freedom to no longer be in the middle of work or family obligations, the freedom to do what truly fulfills you. Seneca reminds us with these words, as long as you live, keep learning how to live. It's never too late to rediscover yourself, to reconnect with your passions, to enjoy your own company. This doesn't mean you should cut ties with your family or be less close. On the contrary, the more fulfilled you feel in your personal life, the more genuine your relationship with them will be. Because then, it's no longer about filling gaps or meeting expectations. It's about sharing moments with a sense of completeness. One of Stoicism's greatest lessons is that the meaning of your life is in no one's hands but your own. So as long as you're here, keep building your own path. You've already done so much for others. Now it's time to do something for yourself. Ask yourself, what brings me joy? What makes me feel alive? It could be learning something new, dedicating time to a hobby you set aside, or even getting involved in projects that ignite your passion. Remember, this is not the end. It's another chapter of your life, a chapter in which you can choose to live for yourself, without ceasing to be a support for others, but without losing yourself in that role. Because the truth is, by fully living for yourself, you're also giving your children the best gift of all, the example of how to face life with dignity, purpose, and joy. So here is my final piece of advice. Don't forget yourself. Don't let the years make you think that your only mission is to be there for others. Live for yourself, seek your peace, and savor every moment with the knowledge that you still have so much to offer and so much yet to discover. We've come to the end of this journey, and if there's one thing I hope you take with you, it's the assurance that at any age, life continues to offer opportunities to learn, grow, and redefine ourselves. Living close to your children in old age can bring unexpected challenges, but it can also be an opportunity to strengthen emotional independence, find balance in relationships, and above all, remember that your life has its own value and purpose. No matter how family dynamics change or what others expect of you, what matters is that you continue to be the author of your story. As the Stoics taught us, the key is to accept what we can't control, but always with the resolve to choose how we respond to it. This stage of life is a gift, and though it comes with challenges, it's also filled with freedom to live authentically, to be a source of love and wisdom, not just for others, but for yourself as well. It's never too late to cultivate that inner peace, that sense of purpose that makes each day count. My name is Gabriel, and if this is your first time here, I invite you to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of the topics we'll be exploring. And if you've made it to this point, it's a clear sign of your commitment to your own personal growth, and that deserves recognition. To know who's walking this journey with me to the end, comment with the phrase, "I am Stoic," and tell me where you're listening from. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. And before you go, don't forget to share this video with someone who might benefit from it. Sometimes, a simple reflection can transform someone's day or give them the strength they need to keep going. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.